The tyrant's grip. Zara woke up to the cold, harsh sound of metal scraping against the floor. She blinked, her eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light of the alien palace. The walls were a dark, ominous gray, lined with strange symbols that she had never understood. The scent of stale air and metal filled her nose. She had woken up like this many times before, tired, bruised, and with a constant reminder of her place in the tyrant's world. A slave. The tyrant, Lord Sarek, ruled over the entire planet with an iron fist. He was cruel and unforgiving. Zara was his personal servant, forced to serve him in whatever way he demanded. No task was too small or too large. It didn't matter to him if she was tired or hurt. If she refused, there would be punishment, and punishment meant pain. Zara shivered as she rose from the cold floor, her hands trembling slightly. She had been asleep on the hard, metal cot in the corner of her small, prison-like room. It was the only place she could find some rest, though it never truly felt like sleep. Every night was filled with nightmares of her life before Lord Sarek's capture, memories of freedom and peace. Those memories were fading, but not enough to stop the anger from burning deep inside her. Today, like every day, she would serve him. She would have to endure whatever tasks Lord Sarek demanded. And no matter how much she hated it, there was nothing she could do. Escape wasn't an option. The palace was surrounded by an army of loyal soldiers, all of them controlled by the tyrant's mind. The thought of trying to run made her stomach turn. Where could she go? What could she do? Just as Zara finished tying her hair back, the door to her room opened with a loud creak. Two soldiers stood at the entrance, their eyes cold and unfeeling. They were here to take her to Lord Sarek. "Come," one of them barked. Zara nodded without a word. There was no use in fighting. No one ever spoke back to the soldiers. They didn't care about her or anyone else in the palace. They were just doing their jobs, following orders without question. As they led her down the long, empty corridors of the palace, Zara couldn't help but notice how quiet it always was. The walls echoed with the sound of their footsteps, but otherwise, everything was silent. The palace was like a tomb, its grandeur hiding the emptiness inside. Zara wondered if the tyrant even cared about the beauty of his own home, or if it was just another way to show how much power he had. Finally, they'd reached the main hall. Lord Sarek was sitting on his throne, a massive, intimidating chair made from what appeared to be the bones of an ancient creature. His pale, almost translucent skin glowed faintly in the dim light. His eyes, black as the void, locked onto Zara the moment she entered. "Zara," Lord Sarek's voice boomed, deep and menacing. "You are late. Again." She stood still, her heart racing in her chest. The soldiers shoved her forward, forcing her to kneel before him. She could feel his gaze piercing through her, stripping away every ounce of dignity she had left. "I'm sorry, Lord Sarek," Zara said quietly, her voice trembling despite her efforts to keep calm. The tyrant chuckled softly, his cold laugh echoing around the room. "Sorry is useless. You are nothing but a tool, Zara, and tools do not need apologies." He stood, slowly walking down the steps toward her. His towering figure loomed over her, making her feel smaller than she already was. "You have one task today," he continued, his voice sharp. "There is a shipment of supplies coming from the outer rim. I need you to oversee the process. If anything goes wrong, you will be punished." His eyes darkened as he said the last part. Zara nodded quickly. "Yes, Lord Sarek, I will not disappoint you." "See that you don't," he said, turning away. His soldiers grabbed her arms, pulling her up and pushing her toward the exit. As Zara walked back down the hall, her mind raced. She had been here for so long that the thought of a life outside of Lord Sarek's control felt like a distant dream. But today something was different. She couldn't explain why, but she had a strange feeling that her life was about to change. Suddenly, as they passed the window, she saw something that made her freeze. A small ship, barely visible, was gliding through the sky. its engines quietly humming as it entered the palace's restricted space. "Wait," Zora shouted, pulling back from the soldier's grip. "What is that?" The soldiers turned to look, their eyes narrowing. "It's nothing. Move along." But Zara could feel something deep in her gut. That ship didn't belong here. It was a human ship. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Before she could think any more, the soldiers yanked her forward. But Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this was her chance. She had to find a way to reach that ship. It was her only hope of escaping the tyrant's grip. An unexpected savior. Zara's heart raced as she was dragged through the palace corridors. The soldiers' hands gripped her arms tightly, their cold, indifferent faces showing no sign of sympathy. She could still feel the strange pull she had felt when she glimpsed the ship. Was it a sign, or just a fleeting illusion? The thought kept echoing in her mind, louder than the footsteps behind her. They arrived at the outer courtyard, where the tyrant's guards stood watch over the entrance to the supply docks. Zara's job today was to make sure the shipment from the outer rim was received, sorted, and delivered without incident. A simple task in theory, but one that never ended well for her. Lord Sarek was a tyrant who demanded perfection, and mistakes were always met with cruel punishments. She barely had time to collect her thoughts before the doors to the loading dock opened with a loud mechanical groan. Zara could feel the eyes of the soldiers on her as they pushed her inside. The large room was filled with crates and equipment, all delivered from distant planets. The smell of metal and chemicals made her feel sick. As she walked deeper into the dimly lit room, her thoughts kept drifting back to the ship. What if it was a message? What if this was her chance? Just as she began to check the crates, a sudden sound broke the silence. A faint hum, like an engine, but it was different, softer. Zara's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted around, but there was no one else in the room. The guards were elsewhere, probably keeping watch at the entrance. No one could have heard it. No one except her. She moved cautiously toward the far corner of the room, where a large piece of machinery sat unattended. And there, behind it, she saw something that made her heart stop. A figure, barely visible in the shadows. It was a human, a man, his face hidden behind a hooded cloak, but his eyes were unmistakable. They were blue, the color of a peaceful sky, and they were locked onto hers with a gaze that felt familiar. He looked like someone who had been through battles, someone who had seen things Zara couldn't even imagine. But his eyes, those eyes, were kind. Before she could move or say anything, the figure stepped forward, his hand raised as if to signal for her to stay quiet. "Zara," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "I'm here to help you." The shock of hearing her name from a stranger made her freeze. How did he know her? Was this a trap? Was he working for the tyrant? No, Zara shook the thought away. The look in his eyes didn't belong to a servant of Lord Sarek. It was genuine. There was hope there, hope that mirrored her own. "How do you know my name?" she whispered back, her voice shaky. The man glanced around cautiously, his blue eyes scanning the room before returning to her. "I've been watching you. For some time now. You're important, Zara. The tyrant. He's not what he seems, but you're not alone anymore." Zara could barely believe what she was hearing. She had lived in this hellish palace for years, with no one to help her, no one to save her. And now, suddenly, here was a stranger, a human, claiming to know her and offering help. She had so many questions, but time was running out. The guards would return soon, and her life was always at risk. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm here to get you out of here. To free you." Zara felt a rush of emotions flood her. Could it be real? Could she really escape this nightmare? The hope was too much, and yet, for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. Before she could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hall. A voice shouted out from the distance. "Zara, where is she?" It was one of the soldiers. She didn't have much time. "Come with me," the man urged, grabbing her wrist. He pulled her into the shadows, just as the doors to the loading dock creaked open. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as she pressed herself against the cold wall, praying they wouldn't be discovered. The soldier's voice grew louder, coming closer. "She can't be far. Find her." The man with the blue eyes didn't hesitate. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small device. A flash of light blinked, and Zara felt a strange sensation in her chest. It was as if the air around her had shifted, become denser. "What is this?" she whispered, her eyes wide with confusion. "It's a cloaking device," he said quickly. "It'll hide us from their scanners. Just stay close." Zara's mind raced. A cloaking device. She had never seen anything like it. In a world ruled by Lord Sarek, technology like this was rare and valuable. And yet, this man had it. He was someone powerful, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up to the tyrant. The footsteps came even closer. Zara could see the soldier's boots through the crack in the door. The man with the blue eyes stepped even closer, his body blocking hers from view. "Trust me," he said softly. "I'll get you out of here, but we have to move now." Zara didn't think. She just nodded, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. She was about to take a step into the unknown, a step that could change everything. She didn't know who this man was or why he was here, but for the first time, she felt hope. And that hope was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, her nightmare was finally coming to an end. A chance at freedom. Zara's pulse thudded in her ears, drowning out the sound of the approaching soldiers. The man beside her, cloaked in shadows, had a quiet intensity about him. His fingers barely brushed her wrist, but she could feel the steady pressure. His grip was solid, comforting in its quiet urgency. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions, to understand how he knew so much about her, why he was here, and why he cared. But the ticking clock of their narrow window to escape kept her mouth shut. She held her breath, barely daring to move, as the soldiers' voices grew louder. "He has to be in here somewhere," one of them grunted. "I told you, she must have slipped past us. Check every corner." The other barked, his voice sharp with frustration. Zara's heart skipped a beat. The soldiers were just feet away now, their boots thudding against the metal floors. The room felt like a giant, echoing tomb. Her body tensed, and her mind raced for a way out. She hadn't realized just how much fear had clung to her all these years until now. But there was something about this moment, this strange, unexplainable chance, that made her feel more alive than she'd felt in ages. The man beside her didn't flinch, his body still intense, every sense tuned to the soldier's movements. He adjusted the cloaking device subtly, a soft hum barely audible, and Zara felt it again, a thick, almost comforting heaviness in the air. The soldiers walked past, just inches from where they hid. Zara dared to peek from behind a corner. Her eyes locked onto the soldiers' retreating forms, the shadows of their helmets flickering in the dim light. For a moment, time stood still. "Now," the man whispered. His voice was soft but urgent. Without thinking, she nodded, and they moved in tandem, sliding along the wall with practiced silence. Every step felt like it might be their last. The soldiers were still close, and the echo of their steps seemed to chase them. They reached a narrow passageway that led deeper into the heart of the palace. The man pulled Zara through the darkened corridors, his hand still clutching hers, but more gently now, guiding her through the maze of cold stone walls. "Who are you?" Zara whispered, her voice trembling slightly as they hurried down the winding path. "How do you know me? Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away, his attention focused on the path ahead. The claustrophobic hallways seemed to close in on them, the air thick and oppressive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of running, he glanced back at her, his face softening. "My name is Talon," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "I'm part of a group, an underground resistance. We've been watching the tyrant for a long time." Zara felt a jolt of surprise. A resistance. She had never imagined such a thing existed. Her life had been so confined to Lord Xarek's palace. She had never thought that others might be fighting back. A resistance? Against Lord Xarek? She asked, her words barely leaving her mouth before another thought struck her. But why me? What do I have to do with this? Talon's face darkened slightly, and he slowed his pace just enough for her to catch up. You're more than you think, Zara. The tyrant. He's been using you. Not just as a servant. You're a symbol, a key to something bigger, something we've been planning for years. Zara felt a strange mix of confusion and disbelief. She was just a slave. That's all she'd ever been. How could she possibly be a symbol of anything? I don't understand, she whispered. Talon looked back at her, his eyes serious and intense. The tyrant has been hiding something. Something he doesn't want anyone to know. It's a weapon. And you have the power to destroy it. Zara stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. What? What weapon? Talon's gaze shifted nervously toward the end of the corridor. I don't know all the details yet, but I know you've seen it, Zara. It's in the palace, hidden somewhere in the vaults. The tyrant has kept it secret for years, but I believe you've been close to it. Her mind whirled. The weapon. She had seen Lord Xarek's secretive meetings, heard whispers among the servants about strange experiments and forbidden technology hidden deep within the palace, but she had never known it was something that could change everything. She tried to process what Talon was telling her, but I don't even know where it is. I'm just a slave. I've never had any power over anything here. Talon smiled, a small, reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's where you're wrong, Zara. You've always had power. You just didn't know it. Before she could ask him what he meant, they turned a corner, and suddenly, the dimly lit hallway opened up into a large chamber. The air felt different here, fresher, less stifled. A series of long, narrow windows lined the walls, offering a glimpse of the starry sky outside. Zara stopped short, her eyes widening as she realized they had reached the outer edge of the palace. We're almost there, Talon said, his voice low and calm. Once we get past the palace's outer defenses, we'll be able to reach the ship. A sense of urgency filled the air as Talon motioned for her to follow. But Zara couldn't stop herself from looking back toward the palace she had known for so long. A palace that had been her prison. For the first time, she wondered if she could ever return. Or would this be the beginning of something completely new? The thought of leaving behind everything, the known and the unknown, made her stomach twist with fear. But the fear was different now. It wasn't just fear of Lord Xarek. It was the fear of freedom. Talon looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Zara, are you ready? Her gaze met his, and for the first time, she didn't hesitate. She nodded firmly, her voice steady. Yes, I'm ready. The secret weapon. Zara's heart pounded against her chest, each beat a loud reminder of how much she was risking. The quiet corridors of the palace seemed endless, and every corner they turned felt like it could lead them into the hands of Lord Xarek's soldiers. But Talon's calm, steady presence at her side gave her a strange sense of security. She had never felt this kind of trust before, certainly not in anyone who worked for the tyrant. As they neared a large, reinforced door at the end of the hallway, Zara could see the faint shimmer of guards' movements through the narrow gaps in the walls. They were getting closer to the palace's outer perimeter, but the last leg of their journey would be the most dangerous. If they were caught now, it would be over. Talon reached into his cloak and pulled out another small device. This one was sleek, with strange, glowing symbols that seemed to shift when Zara looked at them. Without saying a word, he pressed it to the door's control panel, and the device hummed as it interfaced with the security system. Zara held her breath, praying they wouldn't be detected. The door clicked open with a soft hiss, and they slipped through into the darkened hallway beyond. Zara's breath escaped in a quick exhale. The area beyond the door was quieter. No patrolling guards, no sounds of metal clanking against stone. It was as if they had entered a different world entirely, one where the palace's watchful eyes had no reach. But it wasn't enough to calm the nervous flutter in Zora's chest. She still had so many questions. Talon had said she was key to stopping the tyrant's weapon, but she still didn't understand how or why. Was she really capable of bringing down a weapon built to conquer entire planets? She couldn't even imagine how such a thing could exist within the walls of this palace. Talon, she whispered as they moved quickly down the hallway. What exactly is this weapon? And how does it tie to me? Talon's eyes flickered toward her, but his face remained mostly impassive. The weapon is not just a weapon, Zora. It's a force, something far beyond ordinary technology. It can alter entire ecosystems, shift gravitational fields, and even control biological processes. It was created using alien tech, far more advanced than anything we've ever seen. Zora's mind raced. Alien technology. The idea was almost impossible to grasp. She had always lived in the shadow of Lord Xarek's cruelty, never knowing what kinds of powers were hidden behind his throne. But why me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. I'm just a slave. How could I possibly be the key? Talon slowed his pace, turning to face her fully. For a moment, his gaze softened, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before, regret. Because, Zora, you've been close to it. You've seen parts of it. You're more connected to this weapon than you know. And it's been kept hidden from you. Because Lord Xarek fears you will find out the truth. The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt dizzy, her mind struggling to make sense of what he was saying. She had been near the weapon. All those years of running errands for Lord Xarek, of carrying out tasks without ever knowing what was truly going on beneath the surface, was that the reason she had always felt a strange unease, a sense that something was wrong. But the real question that gnawed at her was still unanswered. What did this weapon have to do with her? How was she tied to it? Before she could ask further, Talon motioned for her to follow. He led her down another series of narrow corridors, his movements swift and purposeful. Zara did her best to keep up, her mind still reeling from the revelations. They came to another door, this one reinforced with thick metal plating. There were no visible control panels or locks. Talon pressed his hand to the door, and to Zora's surprise, a faint blue light appeared around the edges of the metal. The door hummed softly, as if it was reacting to his touch. This is the vault, Talon explained in a hushed tone, where Xarek's weapon is kept. Zora's pulse quickened as she stepped closer. This was it, the place where everything changed. The weapon that had been hidden for years. The thing that had been the source of Lord Xarek's power and perhaps his downfall. Talon stood silently for a moment, his eyes flicking to the door and then back to Zora. I know this is a lot to take in, but I need you to understand. You're the only one who can disable the weapon. No one else can get close to it. Zora felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. What do you mean, I'm the only one? Why me? Talon's gaze darkened as he stepped aside, revealing the full extent of the vault door. There was a small glowing crystal embedded into its surface, a locking mechanism unlike anything Zora had seen before. It looked almost organic. You're the only one who can interact with it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The weapon has a sentient core. It's tied to you in ways I can't explain, but it recognizes you. Your DNA, your energy, it's all tied to it. When you touch the core, you'll be able to control it. Zora's head spun. This couldn't be real. She was just a slave. How could any of this be possible? Yet, a strange sense of destiny started to settle over her, a pull she couldn't deny. She had always felt like there was more to her life than this. Something bigger, something waiting to be discovered. And now, it seemed that something was the weapon, the varied force that could either save or destroy everything. Talon stepped closer, his voice urgent. We don't have much time. Lord Xarek will realize we're here soon, and we need to disable the weapon before he gets to it. You have to trust me, Zora. This is our chance. Her hands trembled as she reached for the crystal embedded in the door. The air around her seemed to hum with energy, as if the very walls of the palace were alive, watching her. Her breath hitched as she placed her palm against the surface, feeling a warmth begin to pulse through her fingers. For the first time in her life, Zara felt like she was in control of her fate. The awakening. Zara's fingers trembled as they pressed against the glowing crystal embedded in the vault door. A strange warmth pulsed beneath her touch, radiating up her arm and into her chest. The sensation wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. A mix of energy and emotion she couldn't fully understand. It was as if the door itself was alive, responding to her presence. The hum grew louder, a rhythmic vibration that seemed to sync with her heartbeat. Talon stood silently beside her, his expression tense but expectant. Zara's breath quickened as the crystal glowed brighter, the light pulsing faster with every second. Suddenly, with a low hiss, the massive metal door slid open. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying with it an eerie silence. Zara stepped back instinctively, her heart racing as she stared into the chamber beyond. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of strange, floating lights that hovered near the ceiling. In the center of the chamber stood a towering structure, a sleek black monolith that pulsed faintly with light, almost like a heartbeat. "This is it," Talon said softly, his voice barely audible. The core of the weapon. Zara's legs felt like they might give out beneath her. She had imagined something terrifying. Massive guns, destructive machines. But this was different. The monolith was beautiful in a haunting way, its surface smooth and reflective, rippling like water when she looked at it too long. It seemed alive. What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Talon stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the monolith. "The core isn't just a machine. It's an organic, sentient force, a fusion of technology and biology. It was designed to be controlled by someone with a specific genetic signature. That's why it reacts to you, Zara. You're the only one who can disable it." Zara felt a wave of disbelief crash over her, a slave, the only one capable of shutting down a weapon that could destroy entire worlds. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. "I don't understand," she said, shaking her head. "Why me? I've spent my entire life as a servant. I don't have power. I don't even have control over my own life." Talon turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You've always had power, Zara. Xeric saw it in you from the moment he captured you. That's why he kept you close, why he made you his personal servant. He didn't want you to discover what you were capable of." The words hit her like a physical blow. For years, she had thought of herself as weak, as helpless. But now, standing in front of the weapon, she felt something stirring inside her, a deep, unshakable resolve. She wasn't weak. She had endured pain, cruelty, and humiliation, and yet she had survived. That strength was hers, and no one, not even Lord Xeric, could take it from her. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Talon pointed to the monolith. "You need to connect with the core. It will recognize you. Once it does, you can override its programming and shut it down. But be careful. The core is sentient. It may try to fight back." Zara nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. She took a tentative step forward, then another, until she was standing directly in front of the monolith. The air around it was charged, humming with energy that made her skin tingle. Slowly, she raised her hand and pressed it against the smooth surface. The moment her palm touched the monolith, a surge of energy shot through her. Images flooded her mind, blurry and fragmented, like pieces of a dream. She saw alien landscapes, shimmering cities, and endless fields of stars. And then she saw herself, standing at the heart of it all, her hand outstretched as the monolith pulsed with light. The core was alive, and it was aware of her. "Who are you?" A voice echoed in her mind. It wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely alien either. It was deep and resonant, filled with curiosity and something else she couldn't quite place. Zara hesitated, unsure of what to say. I'm Zara, and I'm here to stop you. The core pulsed violently, and Zara felt a wave of resistance crash against her. It was like trying to push against a hurricane. The core's voice grew louder, more forceful. You are not strong enough. You cannot control me. Yes, I can, Zara said, her voice firm. She clenched her fists, focusing all her energy on the connection between her and the core. She thought of everything she had endured, every moment of pain, every ounce of fear, and let it fuel her resolve. I've survived worse than you. The core faltered for a moment, its light flickering. Zara felt a surge of determination. She pressed harder, forcing her mind to connect fully with the monolith. The resistance was overwhelming, but she refused to back down. This was her chance to take control of her life, to fight back against everything that had been done to her. Finally, with a deafening hum, the monolith's light began to dim. The resistance faded, and Zara felt a rush of triumph as the core's voice fell silent. It's done, Talon said, stepping forward as the monolith went dark. You did it, Zara. The weapon is neutralized. Zara staggered back, her body trembling from the effort. She felt weak, but also powerful. For the first time in her life, she had stood up to something greater than herself and won. But as she turned to face Talon, a chilling thought crossed her mind. Lord Sarek wouldn't let this go unpunished. He would come for her, and this time, he wouldn't stop until she was dead. We have to go, Zara said, her voice urgent. Exarek will know what we've done. He'll be coming for us. Talon nodded, his expression grim. You're right, but we're not running anymore, Zara. This time, we're fighting back. The final confrontation. The air outside the vault was thick with tension. Zara could feel it in her bones, a creeping sense of dread that seemed to hang in the atmosphere like a storm ready to break. She had shut down the weapon, yes, but she knew it wasn't over. Lord Sarek would never forgive her for this. He would come for her, and this time, there would be no mercy. Talon's grip tightened on the hilt of his blade as he led the way through the narrow corridors of the compound. The walls around them hummed with the low vibrational pulse of the remaining defenses, automated turrets, force fields, and security drones, designed to protect Sarek's domain. But Zara wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had felt the power of the core, connected with it, and in doing so, had awakened something within herself. She wasn't just a slave anymore. She wasn't weak. As they neared the entrance, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. Zara's heart skipped a beat. She knew that sound all too well. It was the sound of Lord Sarek's guards, the elite soldiers he had conditioned to obey his every command without question. These were the ones who had tortured her, humiliated her, and forced her into submission for years. Talon raised his hand in a silent signal, and they both ducked into a nearby alcove, their breath shallow as they waited. Zara's pulse hammered in her ears as she pressed herself against the cold, metallic wall. Her mind raced, but there was no time to think. They had to move quickly. Suddenly, the guards rounded the corner, their armor glinting in the dim light. They were large, imposing figures, each one a lethal force in their own right. But Zara's gaze locked onto them with a calmness that surprised even her. These men, these soldiers, they were nothing. Just pawns in Sarek's game. As the first guard passed, Talon was quick to strike, his blade flashing through the air in a blur. The soldier's armor dented with a resounding crack before he collapsed in a heap. Zara didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, moving silently to the next guard. With a single motion, she disarmed him and struck with a force she didn't know she had, sending him tumbling to the ground, unconscious. Talon shot her a surprised look, his eyebrows raised. Impressive, he muttered. Zara didn't answer. She was already moving forward, her mind focused entirely on the task ahead. They had no time to waste. They reached the compound's outer gates just as alarms began to blare, filling the air with an eerie mechanical shriek. The doors were beginning to shut, a heavy steel barrier slamming down between them and the outside world. The guards were closing in. Zara could hear their footsteps, the shouts of commanders ordering reinforcements. "Go," Talon shouted, his voice urgent. "We can't let them trap us in here." Without a second thought, Zara sprinted toward the gate, her legs moving faster than she ever thought possible. The cold wind of the outside world rushed toward her, a promise of freedom just beyond the gates. But she knew that freedom came at a cost. She had no doubt that Lord Xarek was watching, that he was already planning his revenge. They reached the gate just in time. Talon slashed at the control panel with a quick, brutal swipe, sending sparks flying. The gates began to open with a low groan, but it wasn't fast enough. Zara could see the shadows of guards approaching from behind them, weapons raised. "We're running out of time," Talon yelled. Zara turned to face the oncoming soldiers, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what she had to do. With a deep breath, Zara stepped forward, her body filling with an unfamiliar strength. The memories of her captivity, of the years spent in servitude, flashed in her mind like a film reel. She thought of the pain, the suffering, the cruelty. And then she thought of the moment she had taken control of the monolith, the moment she had seized her own power. She was not just a slave anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. The first soldier lunged at her, his blade aimed for her throat. Without thinking, Zara grabbed his arm, twisting it with a speed that surprised even her. The soldier cried out as his weapon fell from his grasp. With a quick flick of her wrist, she sent him sprawling to the ground. Another soldier came at her, this one armed with a stun baton. Zara's instincts kicked in. She ducked beneath his strike, and with a powerful kick, sent him flying into the wall. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Talon was right behind her, fighting off his own group of guards with brutal efficiency. But Zara was different now. She was no longer just reacting to danger. She was taking charge. And then, through the chaos, she heard it, the unmistakable, commanding voice of Lord Xarek. "Enough." His voice rang out, cutting through the noise like a knife. "Stop her." Zara froze, her blood running cold. She didn't need to turn around to know that he was there, standing at the gates. His towering figure was silhouetted against the darkening sky, the cold gleam of his armor reflecting the fading light of the compound. Talon stepped forward, positioning himself between Zara and Xarek. "It's over. Xarek, you lost." Xarek's laugh echoed in the stillness, dark and menacing. "You think you can stop me? You think you can take everything I've built and walk away? You're a fool, Zara." Zara's gaze locked onto Xarek's, her heart pounding in her chest. He was everything she had feared, everything she had once been powerless against. But now she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "This isn't your world anymore," Zara said, her voice steady and unyielding. "And I'm not your slave." With that, she turned to Talon, nodding once. It was time. The final battle was about to begin. A new beginning. The air outside the compound was different, cleaner, fresher, almost as if it recognized the change that had just taken place. The oppressive darkness of Lord Xarek's reign was lifting, and the world beyond the gates, though wild and uncharted, now held the promise of something new. Zara stood at the threshold, the cool wind brushing against her skin as she faced Lord Xarek for what would be the final time. Talon was beside her, his blade at the ready, but it was Zara who felt the weight of the moment more than anyone. This wasn't just a battle for freedom. It was a battle for her life, her future. Lord Xarek's figure loomed large, his presence still commanding despite the growing sense of defeat that radiated from him. His armor gleamed, a symbol of his unshakable arrogance. But Zara could see the cracks now. Beneath the surface, there was fear. There had always been fear, and now it was beginning to surface. He had underestimated her. He had never seen her as anything more than a tool, an object to be controlled. But she was more than that. Zarek's eyes narrowed, his mouth twisted into a cruel grin. "You think you've won," he sneered. "Do you really believe you can defeat me, Zara? I've built empires. You're nothing more than a traitor." Zara's heart pulsed with the power she had awakened in herself, the power of choice, the power of defiance. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice cold and steady. "I'm not your slave anymore, and I never will be again." With a swift motion, she reached up, touching the core of the monolith, the same one that had bound her to Xarek's will for so long. The energy thrummed under her fingers, a comforting hum that resonated with her newfound strength. She could feel it now, coursing through her veins, but it wasn't just the power of the monolith. It was the power she had taken for herself. Behind her, Talon's voice cut through the tension. "Zara, he's just a man, and even the strongest can fall." Lord Zarek's lips curled into a sneer as he stepped forward. "You think you can defeat me with this pathetic display of resistance?" He raised his hand, and a surge of energy shot toward Zara, but she didn't flinch. She had felt this before, the overwhelming might of his attacks, the way his power had once been unassailable. But now, it felt weak. It felt desperate. Zara raised her arm, drawing on the power of the core, and deflected the attack with a single gesture. The energy crackled around her like a protective shield, absorbing and neutralizing Zarek's blast before it could reach her. The realization hit him hard. She wasn't the same woman he had enslaved all those years ago. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was stronger. With a fierce cry, Zara lunged forward, her hands crackling with power, and she sent a burst of energy directly at Zarek. The blast hit him with such force that he was thrown back, crashing into the wall of the compound. His body slid to the ground with a sickening thud. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that followed the fall of a giant, when everything seemed to stop, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Talon moved forward, standing beside Zara as she gazed at the fallen tyrant. "It's over," he said quietly. "He's finished." Zara nodded, her heart still racing. "It is." But as she looked at Zarek, something in her shifted. He wasn't just a tyrant. He wasn't just the man who had enslaved her. He was a product of a system that had long since outlived its time, a system built on fear and domination. And now, that system was crumbling. "Let him go," Zara said, her voice softer now, the fire in her eyes beginning to cool. "There's no point in destroying what's already broken." Talon gave her a questioning look. "You want to let him live?" Zara took a deep breath, the weight of the decision heavy on her chest. "I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. For the world. For all the people he's hurt. It's time to rebuild. To create something better." Talon studied her for a moment, then nodded. "As you wish." Together, they turned away from Zarek, leaving him there. Zara felt no need to watch him suffer. There was nothing more to gain from revenge. It was done. The tyrant had fallen. The chains had been broken. As they walked into the open air, Zara felt a sense of peace settle over her. An unfamiliar feeling, but one that she had longed for. She had no idea what the future would hold, no idea where she and Talon would go next, but for the first time in her life, she felt free. Completely, utterly free. "We're not done yet," Zara said as she glanced over at Talon. "There's still so much to do. The galaxy needs to heal." Talon smiled. "Then we'll do it together, one step at a time." And so, the two of them walked into the unknown, no longer bound by fear, no longer prisoners to a cruel fate. They had taken control of their own destinies, and with each step, they knew they were creating a new future, a future of hope, strength, and freedom.